нас
Never had to even think about it.
Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova said on March 27th that the proposed Black Sea Initiative was a new deal, not an extension of an earlier agreement. This is a new agreement, the contours of which are currently being discussed, Zakharova said when asked by Reuters if the proposed deal was an extension to an earlier memorandum of understanding under which UN officials agreed to help Russia get its food and fertilizer exports to foreign markets. The Black Sea Initiative, which has been recently discussed in Riyadh, safe navigation and export of agricultural products. Is this going to be a new and separate agreement, or it will be an extension of the UN Memorandum on Food Deliveries which expires next July?
This is a new agreement, the contours of which are currently being discussed.
Russia also said on March 25th that the United States had agreed to help it lift a series of Western sanctions and restrictions on food, fertilizer, and shipping companies as preconditions for a maritime security deal in the Black Sea. On March 26th, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that the agreement struck with Ukraine and Russia a day before was in principle, and that Washington was going to evaluate the conditions that Moscow put forward and decide on a way forward. The United States reached separate deals with Ukraine and Russia on March 25th to pause their attacks at sea and against energy targets, with Washington agreeing to push to lift some sanctions against Moscow.
What we have here is an agreement in principle on a Black Sea ceasefire. We got two things from that. The first is we have more detailed definition of what the energy ceasefire entails. And the second is the principle, concept of a Black Sea ceasefire. Obviously, after our meeting, as part of their release, the Russians detailed a number of conditions that they want to see met in order to do that. So we're going to evaluate that. Some of those conditions include sanctions that are not ours. They belong to the European Union. So we're going to be gathering and sort of, when our folks get back, sitting down, going through the proposals, getting their impressions of the conversations, so we can more fully understand what the Russian position is or what their ask is in exchange. And then we'll present that to the president, who will ultimately make a decision about what the next step here. I think it's a good thing that we have both the Ukrainians and the Russians talking about ceasefires, be they energy or be they potentially in the Black Sea. But obviously, this is hard and difficult work.
Shortly after the U.S. announcements, the Kremlin said the Black Sea agreements would not come into effect unless links between some Russian banks and the international financial system were restored. However, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, day after the deal, said that he hopes the U.S. has enough power to press Russia into an unconditional ceasefire. Let's hope and believe that the U.S. has enough power to press Putin into an unconditional ceasefire. Sanctions against Russia should remain in place and strengthen as long as the Russian occupation continues. We also discussed a halt on any strikes on any civilian facilities. It looked like our American partners supported us, but they did not get support of this from Russia. Nobody wants to drag certain countries into war. The military contingent is important for control. The military contingent is combat ready, but it should be there to control the situation and to monitor the situation. At a joint press conference with French President Emmanuel Macron in Paris, Zelensky said sanctions against Russia should remain in place and be strengthened. Kiev earlier said it was prepared to implement the agreement immediately.